My name's Kellen. I'm an alcoholic. And yeah, I get the honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker. This person means a lot to me. I've known him for about over 2 years, and a lot of my sobriety and the quality of my life is a direct result of working with this guy and him kind of showing me the ropes. Um, he's someone that shows up. I remember like when I first came in, like years ago, I remember seeing him around, and that's the case today. He's someone who's consistent. He shows up to meetings, and I believe he lives the principles in all his affairs, and he's got a really good life today. And um, I think it's going to be a really nice speaker meeting, and I'd like to introduce Levi.
My name is Levi. I'm an alcoholic. And it's a honor and a privilege to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm sober by the grace of God and the fellowship of the program. And I'd like to welcome anybody that's new to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll tell you what they told me when I was new, that um, if you wind up in AA, your life is your fault. And I didn't like hearing that when I first came in, but I found it to be the truth, even at and my sobriety date's the 3rd of February 2007. So I'm sitting on 17 years of sobriety, and it's a miracle. And I know it's all from the fellowship and the grace of God today. Sometimes I forget that, so I got to keep coming back. And I just want to start the meeting with a little bit of a reading um, from chapter 11, A Vision for You. It says here, for most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, companionship, and colorful imagination. It means release from care, boredom, and worry. It is joyous intimacy with friends and a feeling that life is good. But not so with us in those last heavy days of drinking. The old pleasures were gone. They are but memories. Never could we recapture the great moments of the past. There is an insistent yearning to enjoy life as we once did, and a heart-breaking obsession that some new miracle of control will enable us to do it. There is always one more attempt and one more failure. The less people tolerated us, the more we withdrew from society, from life itself, as we became subjects of King Alcohol, shivering denizens of his mad realm. The chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down. It thickened, ever becoming blacker. Some of us sought sordid places, hoping to find understanding, companionship, and approval. Momentarily we did, then become oblivion in the awful awakening to face the hideous four horsemen. Terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. Unhappy drinkers who read this page will understand. And if you're new, I hope that's where you're at. Because in order to get this deal, you have to be in a hell of a lot of pain, and that's what happened to me. And whenever I share at this meeting, I don't ever really seem to break away from um, the way I've always done it in the past. This meeting means a lot to me in my early sobriety. This meeting I was at the Union Hall down on Main Street in the upstairs there, and um, it was like the perfect Sunday experience in early sobriety, and it was one of the first meetings I had my first service position at, and I was the speaker seeker. And I'd remember I'd get the speakers lined out for the month, and I'd print out a little a flyer and pass it out to all the meetings. And half the time I'd spell their name wrong, or I'd get the wrong home group or the wrong sobriety date, and they'd come back and complain about it. But it was a really powerful meeting, and it really helped me get through those first early days of sobriety, because I'm the type of drunk I'd have to go to 3 or 4 meetings a day, every day, just to make it through. And we're blessed, the people that live here in Missoula, to have that opportunity, because I've been in places in Montana where they only have one meeting a week, and I just don't think I could have made it with that. But I just I figure I just talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And for me, uh, the highest spiritual plane I will ever reach in Alcoholics Anonymous is sitting across the table from another drunk, sharing my experience, strength, and hope. For me, it will never get any better than that. And so I grew up in a small town in Idaho on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, and there it wasn't cardigan sweaters and highballs. It was oblivion drinking, alcoholics, and that's where I learned how to drink. And my father was a logger and an outlaw, and uh, my mother worked in alcoholics and drug addict and sex addict, and all their character defects kind of rolled down into me. And I used to be resentful about that for a long time, but through the grace of God and the program, I've learned that that's a gift, because all those defects of character I got from them are what's helped me to be useful to God today. So that's a blessing. But so my parents got divorced before I was a year old, and then I mainly was raised by my grandparents, and they're a huge part of my story because uh, my my grandma she finally passed away last year, and I was able to show up through sobriety and be a part of and give rather than take, and she was just an awesome woman. She's a real tough cowgirl, and my grandpa, he's still alive, and my wife and I got to go spend time with him before Christmas, and he's at every weekend and still goes fishing for steelhead, and yeah, he's just a really cool guy. He's helped a lot of people, and he tried to teach me that's what life was all about, when I was young, but I was too stubborn and arrogant to listen. I had to come to AA to figure out that's what this is about. So, and the first time I drank, uh, he's not an alcoholic, but he always had a fifth of wild turkey up in his cupboard in the kitchen. And I remember sometimes he'd open the cupboard and I'd see that bottle there and I'd think about that. So the first time I drank, a friend and I took that bottle of wild turkey out to the woodshed. We didn't get fall down, blackout drunk that day, but I remember the taste of that whiskey, and I remember thinking I'm gonna do that again. And then when I was 12 years old is when I started drinking and using every single day, and it was mainly drugs at that time. I just saw what alcohol did to my family members, and I thought it was kind of gross, and I always just kind of wanted to be a junkie when I got older, and but that didn't work out, and I and another thing happened too when I was really young, and uh, was I was molested when I was 5 years old, and I used to be really resentful about that too, and because it prevented me from ever being able to have a girlfriend or anything like that in high school or growing up after I graduated. So I was really pissed off about that. But then after I went through the steps a few times in AA, I could look at it a little bit differently and say things like, well, I was a good looking kid, you know, and I could not didn't have to take myself so seriously anymore, And I know today that experience was a gift as well, because I've been able to help other men who have had the same thing happen to them, and it's not something to be ashamed about anymore. And but so I always just wiped out on something, and I had barely graduated high school, and there was there was only like 26 people in my graduating class, and looking back now, I could see that they were all really good people, you know, and a lot of people tried to help me. But like I said, I was too arrogant and self-centered to realize what they were trying to do. And so I graduated, and then I bummed around town there, and um, I was always involved in like really highly illegal activities, and that's where um, like my father and I, that's the main things we did together was all like breaking the law, and but in for the millennium, I wound up down in Big Cypress on the Big Cypress Indian Reservation, and when it was Y2K, and it was when there was there was a band there that was playing because that was the only place they could find where they could do their big party was on a sovereign nation, and there was over 100,000 people there for when it turned from 99 to 2000. And I wound up down there, and I was in the middle of this crowd, and I was completely twisted on drugs and messed up, and I was standing right in the middle of all this huge crowd of people, and I was looking around, and I've never felt more lonely in my entire life. And that's for me, that's when I knew that something was really wrong with me. That I could be at like the biggest party in the world and just feel completely alone. So, and then I came back from that, and I was like in a drug-induced schizophrenia for about 6 months. And I finally came out of that, and I got a job for this big highway construction company. And that was kind of like looking back now, I can see that that was a gift as well, because it kind of forced me out of my shell a little bit and got me around other people that I wouldn't normally be around. And they started taking me all over the inland and in the Northwest and the Pacific Northwest, and doing these big construction projects. And so I couldn't use what I was working for that company. So I'd quit drinking earlier on, and then I had stopped using, and then that's when I started to slowly go insane, not having a solution for what was wrong with me. But these guys they were taking me all over the place, and finally in 2003, I was 23 years old, and I just came to this place. I was working down in southeastern Idaho, and I would drive back and forth. I moved over to Missoula by then, because I always liked the people in Missoula. They were always super kind. And I was driving back and forth from that place to Missoula on the weekends, and then I would drive through this one part of the desert there in southern Idaho, and I started thinking, if I don't start drinking again, I'm going to kill myself. And that was a thought I'd had, you know, since I was 8 years old, about taking my own life. And so in 2003, I went downtown, and I started drinking alcohol again. And when I moved here, I moved in this shitty little apartment on Stevens Avenue, and it was this will date a few of you. It was right by Bucks Club and Squires, and back then you could get a burger and a beer for $1 at Bucks Club, and it reminded me of some of the bars on my reservation, so I really liked it there. And then I would go downtown to the Top Hat, and then it's the old Top Hat, not the abomination they have now. and and a lot of bars downtown, like they wouldn't serve me, or and like um I think it's the Eddie's Club, they wouldn't serve me there. I forget what it's called now anyway, but one place that would always serve me alcohol was the Top Hat. And so Steve Garr, my money was always good to him. And I don't know, like my whole world just revolved around Front Street, and you know, my world kept getting smaller and smaller, and that loneliness that I was trying to drink away just kept getting bigger and blacker and deeper inside of me. And then all the humiliation that comes with drinking started to come tenfold to me, and so I'm grateful they read chapter 3 at this meeting because my drinking got to the point where I used to carry this. No, I always put my wallet in my front pant leg pocket, and I was drinking so much that I pissed my pants so much that the piss in my pants and the wallet irrigated my social security card. And so when I came to this meeting the first time and they read something about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, I didn't have to nudge the guy next to me and ask what that meant, because that was my life. And then I started getting DUIs. My first DUI was in the Southgate Mall parking lot. It was like 2 in the afternoon, and I was stuck in the a bush with my little shitty Dodge D50 pickup. And I was getting out to put the hubs in so I could back off the shrub there. And I turned around and there was a police officer there. And I fell down twice during my field sobriety test. And I woke up in jail, and I never detoxed that hard in jail before. The first time I went to jail, I was 14 years old, and I'd been in and out, the entire time I was drinking and using. But I never detoxed that hard in jail before. And then when I came to, I realized, I was there as a direct result of my drinking and alcohol, and I swore up and down I was never going to touch another drop. But a funny thing happened a couple of weeks after that. I got out of jail. I started thinking, I've been too hard on myself, and I could probably get away with a drink or two. And then it was, right back into the insanity of active alcoholism. And then by this time, as my drinking progressed, I couldn't afford a apartment or anything anymore. And I was living in a tent, on these big highway projects. And I was living in a tent in Mission behind this place that used to build these log homes. It was called Legacy Log Homes. And I was drinking all the time, and I got another DUI. And by that point, my employer, they were starting to get pretty fed up with my behavior. And because they just knew I was just a selfish and self-centered puke, and I wasn't helping anybody. So I was trying to save my job, and I was trying to get a reduced jail sentence. And I started thinking about this treatment center that my father had gone to in the late 90s. And it was a place up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and it was called Port of Hope. So I contacted my tribe, and then they got me up there. And I was just there to try to heal up for a little bit and get some good sleep and some food for a month's time, And I remember they loaded us up in a van one day, and I asked the guy driving the van, I said, well, where are we going today? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. And I just got this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'm like, darn, I think I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd heard when I was a little kid, playing in the dirt, I heard my father complain about AA because he had been court ordered there because he got two DUIs in a week one time, and they had sent him to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he would, talk with his friend about how horrible it was, and said there was always some old woman knitting. And so that's all I knew about AA at that point, is I had old women knitting, and it sucked really bad. So, but for me, my experience was a lot different than my father's. I'm very grateful for that. They got loaded us out of this van, and I was walking down the steps of this meeting, and I didn't know what it was at the time, but when I was walking down the steps of that meeting, I had this overwhelming feeling just come over me. I never felt it before, and it was two things, and pretty much the same thing. It was hope, and it was the presence of God. And I was, 26 years old. I'd never felt that in my entire life. Had absolutely no hope. I was just full of self-pity and resentment and despair. So not once in my life had I felt any hope at all. And I'm grateful that they had real alcoholics in that meeting, because they were talking about their drinking and what it was like and what happened to them and what it was like now. And I just fell in love with AA immediately. And there they did it a little bit different. For new people, they asked, is there anybody new here with a desire to stop drinking? And I said, my name is Levi, I'm an alcoholic. And I stood up and I said that, and that was the first time ever I'd really said it that way. And I knew that I was being honest, like the first time ever in my entire life. And I felt like a huge mountain just rolled off my back when I said those words. And it was a really powerful experience for me. And I got my little white chip. And by the time I got out of the treatment center, and I took a bus back to Missoula, and because I had more court stuff to deal with here, and I don't know, like for me, um I loved AA, but I didn't understand about asking for help. And so I went in and out of meetings for a couple of months there, and I go to the morning meeting, and there they had me washing the coffee cups. And one day I was washing the coffee cups with this guy, and he turned to me and he says, "Are you selling drugs?" And I said, "No, you can't be selling drugs and going to Alcoholics Anonymous, right?" And he said, "Good answer." And he took me back to his place for breakfast, and his wife was an Al-Anon, and he'd been sober a few years in AA. And I remember before he ate, um, his wife said this prayer, and she thanked all of our individual um, higher powers for allowing us to be there that morning. And it just struck me because um, it was the first time in 4 years that anybody had invited me into their house, because I wasn't the type of drunk that got invited to the after party, when the bar closed, because no one wanted to deal with me. So that was a huge. So for me, this thing is about action more than about words. I can come up here and talk and listen to other men share in the fellowship, but this is a program of action. And that guy took an action. He took a chance to invite me into his house. And that's that struck louder with me than anything I'd ever heard in a meeting. So when I went out drinking again, I'd be thinking about that guy and wondering what he was doing in his sobriety. But then, anyway, my last drunk was late January, early February 2007, and I went to Idaho. I had some more court stuff over there. I hitchhiked over Lolo Pass to Kuski, and then I was coming back, and I had almost 60 days of sobriety, going to multiple meetings a day, but no sponsor and no steps. And after not having a solution for that long, other than just meetings, I started thinking it'd probably be all right for me to smoke a little non-habit, non-addictive marijuana. And then when I did that, the phenomenon of craving for alcohol was stronger than it's ever been. It was like my mind was screaming, that you needed a drink. And so I was hitchhiking back to Missoula, and it was really cold that winter, and I had to stay the night about halfway through on the Lochsa. And I was sitting there, I had my little fire going, and I remember thinking, this is what it's going to be like, for the rest of my life. If I continue to drink and use, I'm going to be completely alone and cold, and nobody's going to, I'm not going to be able to help anybody. And so I made it back to Missoula, and I went down to the Top Hat, and I ordered a double shot of wild turkey, and I threw it back, and I went into a 3-day blackout. And then when I came to, I was laying out in the snow, and it was really cold that night. I pissed my pants again, and it frozen my pant leg to my leg, and I heard a voice say, "You don't have to live like this anymore." And ever since I've heard that voice, I haven't had to. So I came back to AA, and I finally was willing to listen, with the men that had sobriety, success in sobriety, had what they had to say. And they said things like, if you want to stay sober, it's a good idea to get a sponsor. And they said things like, going to meetings and not drinking is great, but it's not our program of recovery. Our program of recovery is outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went up to that guy that invited me to his house, and I asked him if he would help me. And he said he'd be honored to. And that was the first time ever in my life anybody said they'd be honored to do anything with me. So I went over to his house in our first little sponsorship meeting, and he threw this photo down on the table, and I looked at this photo, and in this picture, this guy, um, in this photo, his head was all swole up, and he was black and purple and blue, and he's in this neck brace, and I said, "What's this?" You know, and he said, "That's me." He said, "That's what I look like when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous." And I looked down at this photo, and I looked back up at this guy. There was not one mark on his face from the injuries he sustained when he was in his last drunk driving wreck. And right there, that I knew that man had what I wanted, you know. And I asked him, "Well, how do you get it, Eric?" And he says, um, "You're gonna adopt a program of rigorous honesty." So he had me write out my first step, and then after I read it to him, he says, "Are those the thoughts and behaviors of a sane person?" I said, "No." And he says, "Now do you understand the need for a God in your life?" I said, "Yes." And it just went on from there. And I did my first fifth step at 45 days of sobriety, and I was able to tell that man every single thing about me that I've been trying to keep hidden for my entire life. And I also told him the very worst thing I ever did to another human being. And it was a couple of days later after that fifth step, I realized I didn't want to drink anymore. And the obsession has been removed. And then we went through the rest of the steps, and um, the amends was huge. I didn't really understand at the time what steps 6 and 7 were, but I just kind of went through the motions as best I could. But when I got to the ninth step, that's when the fear of people really started to leave me. And that's when I really became sold on the program. And the more and more I came to believe in a power greater than myself. But and then another thing I want to mention about the fellowship when I was new, there was a young gentleman when I was new. He had a brain injury, and he had to learn how to read again by reading how it works in the 12 traditions and meetings. And he'd been assaulted by by a native person down in Arizona, and he had a lot of fear of native people. But when I came in, he could see I was really struggling, and he walked through that fear to help me. And we did things together every single day. We'd go golfing, and we'd go to the university and shoot pool, and we did everything together. We spent a lot of time together in my early sobriety, and I don't know if I would have made it if it wasn't for people like him. But anyway, um, I was like 2 years sober, and I felt like I wasn't, giving back to the fellowship as much as I could. I was a GSR for my home group, Mizzou group, and I was doing all these other things, but I wasn't sponsoring anybody. And so I went to this old timer and I said, I need some help. I need to figure out how to work with other men. And so he invited me back to his house, and we had dinner. And then after the dinner, we did this little prayer, and he asked God to remove the things in me that were blocking me from being able to carry the message to the man that's still sick. And then I was at a meeting the next day, or maybe it was the day after that, and this guy walked up to me and said, "Will you be my sponsor?" And but my higher power has a sense of humor, because this guy looks so bad, I didn't even want to be seen with him. And he was talking to himself, and he was living in a tent in the dog park, and it was around Christmas time. But I invited him back to my place. We were trying to get him into the share house at that time, and then one night we were watching the movie Rain Man, and he turned to me partway through the movie, and he said, "It's almost like Dustin Hoffman's character has helped him Tom Cruise's character more, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. That's exactly what was happening between me and this guy. This guy has helped me far more than I'll ever help him. And that's what I've learned here, is that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my troubles. The more I try to help other alcoholics, the less likely I'm going to be in that trap. And I know for me that nothing is so much ensured immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. And that's kind of been my experience. Out of all the men I've tried to help, very few of them have stayed sober. But the way I look at it is I have a 100% success rate because I've stayed sober every single time, you know. And then the company I was working for, they started regaining their trust in me, and they sent me out on these jobs. And I don't know, it wasn't really good for me to be on the road, away from the fellowship. I'd always go to meetings on the road and stuff, but it wasn't really conducive with having that something reliable that I could come back to every single night, you know, at my home group. So um, and there was a lot of stuff going on during that time. Like um, I'd always struggled with sex addiction and pornography and things like that. And I knew that it was just like blocking me between me and my higher power. And it was, you know, causing problems in my sobriety with relationship. And I found this guy named Jim Pease, who's his last, he doesn't mind me sharing his last name. It's Pitson, and they used to call him the Pits. But he was from, he came out here from Minnesota, and he'd spent a lot of time in the fellowship in Missoula, and he'd helped a lot of people. And I was telling him about what was going on, and, you know, he helped me, and he took me through the steps, and he took me through my first real sexual inventory. And that's when I understood what my character defects were finally, that it was this really super low self-esteem, you know, being fed by a fear of abandonment and a fear of authority. And we dug really deep and went through the work on that. And it was funny because the obsession drink had been removed, but then I would still think about killing myself in sobriety. But after I went through the steps with him, we said the 7-step prayer together. And after I said that 7-step prayer, I realized I could no longer take my own life because, you know, my life doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my God. You know, I'm in the world to play the role he assigns me. You know, he doesn't really care about what I want. You know, he cares about what I do. And when I stick close to him and perform his work well, he provides what I need, you know. And so that was huge. And you know, it's something a lot of men in the fellowship really struggle with. And I try to help the same way I was helped. And then, so I was getting burnt out of working on the road. Like I'd be sponsoring 8 or 9 guys during the wintertime, and they'd send me out in the springtime, and a lot of those guys would get drunk, you know, and I knew that wasn't nothing to do with me. That was between them and their God, but I didn't really like that feeling. So Jim, again, he kind of challenged me to go to the university. And so I wrote an inventory about it, and I found out that I'd always been really jealous and resentful of people with education. So, because I wanted that for myself. So I went, and I started going to the university, and I was in my 30s at that time, and I was terrified because I was an older student. And I went to my first class at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I tested so low on the math assessment that the first class was a remedial math class. It didn't even count for college credit, and I was just terrified. And I walked into that first classroom, and I looked around. It looked just like an AA meeting, just a bunch of losers like me. And that ended up, I failed it 4 times, but I finally made it through. And then it was at this time, you know, it was about halfway through college that my beautiful wife, you know, came into my life, and she just has done nothing but you know, pushed me to achieve things that, you know, wouldn't have come my way had she not, you know, been involved. And she really supported me through the college experience. And I'm so grateful for her. And the things I've seen her walk through in sobriety have been very difficult. She experiences chronic pain, and the doctors really still can't figure out what's going on with her. But throughout everything, all the surgeries she's had, and all the pain she's experienced, she never stops showing up here to help other people. And so I'm grateful I get to to bear witness to her strength and hope, every single day. And just because we're both sober doesn't mean we don't have, marital problems. It's like, even though there's no active alcoholism in our life, the disease of alcoholism is still very active, and so we got to do a lot of work, and I'm grateful that we both have, great sponsors, and we continue to meet with them, and just try to put God in the middle, and it always works out, when we do that. And then, so I graduated college, and I was still working construction that summer afterwards. And I'm grateful for the pandemic, because I don't think I ever would have made it in those last major business classes with a lot of math had it not been for the pandemic. And so I made it through graduation, and I remember before I even started college, there was this building out on North Reserve Street that I would go, well, I would drive by and I always wondered what happened there. And one day I walked into that building, and I looked around, and I told myself I wanted to get a job there because I really admired the work that they did. And but I knew they weren't going to hire me, off the street with no degrees. So when I went to college, I kind of forgot about that experience. And then this um, job application came up online, and I filled it out, and they wanted to do an interview with me. And I remember I was standing on the sidewalk in front of the building. By this time, you had to have a security card to get into the building, and I was standing there waiting for the HR person to come and get me so I could do my interview. I started looking around at the building, and I realized I'd been in there before, 6 years prior. And I realized that it was the same place. I told myself I wanted to get a job, and then it was weird. Like, I had this feeling even before they come to get me for the interview that I had the job, and I knew that that was God working in my life again. So I ended up working there, and it's been a really, really cool experience. I don't know. It's just another thing that I can only credit the grace of God to. I've been working there for almost 4 years, and they I don't know. It's just really mind blowing, and I'm starting to run out of steam now. But um, I just want to talk about my home group, I guess, for a little bit. This kind of the Missoula group. It's the OSA meeting in Missoula, and I remember when I first one of the first times I went there was when I was still drinking, going in and out of AA, and I'd always show up to the meetings like a half an hour early. And I didn't know it, but this night they were finishing up their business meeting prior to the actual meeting, and I was walking down the steps, and I heard this big scream and a crash, and it was a girl that was throwing a metal folding chair across the room at an old timer, Charlie Abel, and and it made me want to come back and see what they're going to do the next night. It's it's never been the how wonderful and perfect people in Alcoholics Anonymous is what's attracted me. It's been their defects of character, because they it's the same thing I have, and so that's been my home group my entire length of my sobriety. And I try to sponsor men that come into that meeting, and then over the past few years has changed a little bit. A lot of the old timers that would go have passed away, and not from like COVID or drinking or anything like that, just from old age, and it's been really painful to lose those guys, because they taught me not to put up with any bullshit, and because I'm grateful when I was new that there was men who weren't afraid to get in my face, and tell me that, my behavior wasn't acceptable in the meeting. And because, those guys cared more about my life than did my feelings, and a lot of times they told me things I didn't want to hear, but sure, looking back now, I'm grateful for what they did for me. So I try to show up and help the group out, when I can, and and then I also, want to talk about the big book a little bit. Like, for me, I was confused about what Alcoholics Anonymous is, in my early sobriety, and still, sometimes. But to me, all the work I've done to stay sober has happened out there. It's not happened in here. This is just a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the program is a program of action, and it happens out there. And for me, it was this lack of power that was my dilemma, and I looked everywhere, for it. But for me, I had I'm just a garden variety drunk. I had to find it inside the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where I found the power that not only helps me stay sober, but gives me the ability to help other people. And I think that's what the third step is about for me today. That's where it stops being about me and starts being about you. And I can't go through the rest of the steps until I've done a good third step, because the third step is where I get the power to go through the rest of the 12 steps. Because I can't take a good hard look at myself in step 4 without having something to guide me, because that's not my nature to do an inventory of my behavior. If it would have been, I would have done it prior to getting here. But so I've had a lot of people help me, and my sponsors, Eric and Jim and Michael, and all these guys that taken time out of their lives and suggested I do things I didn't think it would help. And when I was in probably some of the most pain in my sobriety, my sponsor Eric, he thought it'd be a good idea for me to go and volunteer at the Paul Varela Center when it was on Ryman Street. And at the time, I really didn't see how that had anything to do with my problem, But I started going down there anyway, and it was like every time I go down there, it was like God was shoving it in my face, just how selfish and self-centered I really was, and consume myself. And a funny thing happened. I ended up falling in love, with the homeless people of Missoula, and so I wouldn't have that experience had I not taken direction from my sponsor. So I can't speak enough about sponsorship, and just keep an open mind, and just keep coming back. And I pretty much run out of things to say. I'm just really grateful for my wife, and for her family, and for fellowship, and being able to take advice from the men in the program. And I just want to read one last little thing. This is from a mid 19th century Nez Perce chief. He said, "When I shot any kind of bird, when I killed, I saw its life went out with its blood. This taught me for what purpose I am here. I came into this world to die. My body is only to hold a spirit life. Should my blood be sprinkled, I want no wounds from behind. Death should come fronting me." And that's what this program has taught me how to do, is to not get pimped out by the disease, and show up and stand and be true. And I still make a lot of mistakes, but today I can make amends. And so with that, I hope everybody here has a nice day, unless you have other plans. Thank you.